It can be easy for a pastor to care spiritually for his congregation and to think about the ways they need to be developed in the ordinary means of grace and to participate in the life of the church, and then neglect his own and always be thinking about giving in terms of spiritual content and not really receiving. So what warnings or cautions or wisdom would you give us to that end?
I think the best way to answer this first is to say this is really the heartbeat of practical shepherding, in that pastors give their lives because people need a pastor to care for them. But who pastors the pastors? And it's really what we're trying to be a part of. And that's a call for a pastor then to realize that he needs spiritual care just as much as the congregation does. The problem is there's really no mechanism within the church to do that. So a pastor has to be mindful to look for the means of grace within the local church, even as the pastor, that's good, that does good spiritually for his own soul. So, I think that's really what we're talking about with this. So the first is an awareness. A lot of pastors think part of the call of the ministry is to just bypass they just have to give that up, that somebody's going to care for them like they're caring for everybody else. And we obviously want to push back significantly on that. But to just think of, the Lord's Supper and allowing other pastors, even in the church or outside the church, to actually take responsibility and care for you, to sit under preaching and listen, not just, this is kind of the category of all of that. And I have to acknowledge that early on in my ministry, I just didn't have a category for that in a way that I definitely did in the latter part of it. Part of that was realizing I needed to be cared for spiritually. I needed someone and I actually had to work hard at times to find someone who would take responsibility and a mentor. And a lot of times when pastors aren't willing to work hard for that, they don't get that. So have you found someone caring for your own soul outside the church that's been the most spiritually beneficial, or even within your own church?
Well, I've benefited from Practical Shepherding's ministry. I have the privilege to participate in some of it now, but the reason I have such affection for it is I participated in it and actually gleaned from it. So part of the answer is yes, and part of that is just your investment in me. And outside the church has been a big part of it, and trying to care spiritually by submitting to the preaching of the Word. So even if on a regular basis you are preaching, it's good to sit under preaching, and there are lots of faithful pastors who are doing that. And we talk about the dangers, podcast ministries can be, but there's a great benefit to pastors in being able to be fed in that way. But I found one of the challenges, maybe this will resonate with you, is our vocabulary and our ability to talk about these things on a whim can sometimes shield us, or can shield or hide the fact that we're really not investing in our own spiritual care. So I can answer the questions appropriately when somebody asks me how I'm doing, and I can even use sophisticated language and Christian language to talk about things, but there may not be anything behind that really happening in my own soul.
I also think this is a time to press again, as assignments in the reading that everybody has done around this, the need for us to pursue having a spiritual mentor of some kind as a pastor. And that even though you may have elders and other pastors and things in your church that care for you, that take responsibility for you, I've just become a big believer in needing someone even outside the church. So whether that's an older pastor who would take responsibility, whether it's a counselor you go and go see regularly, having that care, that spiritual care outside the church can create a safety that even you don't experience, a pastor doesn't experience in his own church as well. Have you found that to be true with the people who have helped you outside the church?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's a different relationship that you may have with them, but can be a critical part of it. And sometimes those relationships are forged early in ministry. The people who invest in you can continue to do that. And sometimes just realizing that need, right? Just admitting that you might be enduring in pastoral ministry, but you need help, and we all do. None of us are sufficient for this calling. But that can be a difficult challenge, just the pride in wanting to continue in our own strength.
Yeah, I also feel the need to mention this in the midst of this conversation, that to not ignore just the ordinary means of grace in the spiritual disciplines to care for our own soul spiritually. That's really the foundation of this conversation. It's ultimately not relying on someone else, but realize, so be proactive to make sure that you're not always leading the Lord's Supper. You actually can sit and participate with the rest of the church. You're not always the one preaching, but you're actually sitting under the preaching of others in your own church. And because there are ways for pastors to experience the means of grace in their own local church in a way that needs to be consistent in our life.
That's exactly right.